Chapter 6 The Crossing. The borderlands began not with a wall, but with silence. Trees thinned, the soil shifted, and the air itself felt less burdened by the weight of doctrine. She walked for hours before realizing that her breath came easier, that the rhythm of her steps was not longer chained to fear. Each mile paced between her and the settlement was a thread cut from the web that had bound her. Stories had painted the outside as savage. It was not to the degree that they had painted, but that she had envisioned from those paintings. Elders told of beasts that tore flesh from bone, of tribes who devoured any stranger, of landscapes too barren to sustain life. Yet here, in the quiet expanse beyond the settlement, she saw signs of another truth. Abandoned tools rusted in the grass, remnants of a campfire hidden beneath stones, faint laughter echoing across the wind. The world was not empty. It was waiting. It was waiting for her. The first crossing was a river, wide, cold, its current strong enough to drag a body beneath in seconds. She hesitated on the bank, the scar on her palm throbbing with memory of past. Behind her lay the settlement's shadow. Ahead lay freedom. So she stepped into the water, gasping as it swallowed her legs. Each stroke was a defiance, each breath a claim. Although new to her, she would succeed. She would fulfill this. She would not drown. She would not float. She would move forward, stroke by stroke. When she pulled herself onto the far shore, shivering and exhausted, she knew a boundary had been crossed, not just of land, but of herself and her being. Nights in the borderlands carried different songs, wolves howled from distant ridges, owls called from the tree line. She curled into howls of rock, fireless and cold, but with a heart that beat steady. She was the flame. Dreams came less often of the chapel and more often of roads winding outward, meandering through to children unshackled by doctrine, of faces unafraid to speak their names. The borderlands whispered of possibilities, and she listened. Hunger pressed harder, though, each and every day. The berries that had once sufficed now left her weak, and the roots gave her little strength. Yet with hunger came discovery. As they say, innovation breeds opportunity. She found mushrooms growing in shadows, fish darting beneath river stones, wild herbs that left her tongue sting, but her body renewed. Every discovery was a lesson the matrons had denied her, proof that the world beyond was not chaos, but knowledge that had feared her to learn. The borderlands tested more than her body, they tested her will. Storms broke without warning, as Mother Nature does, winds tearing branches like paper, as Mother Nature has. She sheltered in caves, clutched her knees to her chest, as insects and those crawling species crawled about, and the whispers that vowed carried her from the binding house. I will not break, she said. Lightning split, though, the sky, and in this brief fire she saw her reflection carved against the stone across from her, unbent and unbroken. She was not alone. One night, though, faint from footsteps and footprints led her to a ridge where firelight flickered. From afar she saw figures moving, these voices carrying across the night. Fear rooted her in her place. Were these the savages the elders had warned her of? What you are taught, you take in, whether or not you want to. You work from that knowledge, even though you are betrayed by that knowledge. That is the starting place from what you know. However, she thought, or were they like her, survivors beyond the walls? A thought she must have implanted in herself. because it was new. It was from no one else. She did not approach, though, yet, but knowing they existed filled her with both hope and dread. A quandary. If there were others, there were more to be in the world, and therefore there were more survivors. There was more of those who wanted a choice. The crossing was not a single act, just of her defiance, but of many. Each river farted, each ridge climbed, each fire built without permission was a step into a self she had never been allowed to claim. By the time she reached the far valley, weeks from the settlement, she understood that she was no longer defined by the line. She was not a vessel, she was not bound. More importantly, she was not his. She was, however, her own, and the crossing had proven it. She stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying scents of pine and smoke from unseen camps. And below, rivers shimmered like threads of silver, and the horizon stretched wide enough to swallow every lie she had ever been told. Tears blurred her vision, but they were not for despair. They were of awe. She had crossed not just the border of land, but the border between who she had been and who she was now becoming. The crossing was complete, but the journey was far from begun. Because behind her lay walls that preached purity, ahead lay a world untamed, fragile, dangerous, alive, and unknown. She pressed her scarred palm to her chest and whispered one last vow into the wind. I will not return. The borderlands had tested her, but she had emerged, not broken, not bent, but remade. She built rough shelters from the branches and stones, fragile walls against the elements that whispered of both futility and defiance. Nights became tests of endurance. The cold pressed into her bones, and she counted stars until exhaustion claimed her, whispering fragments of forbidden prayers. Each day brought new terrain, marshes that sucked at her steps, ridges where the wind shrieked, the valleys echoing with silence too deep to trust. Her anger was a constant, a presence sharper than fear. She was scavenged, bite her roots, and drank from streams that shimmered with pale light under the moon. Thoughts of the settlement haunted her. The bells and chants returned, memories like dreams, but they were lost all of their power, fading into the background noise before the rustle of grass. She imagined lives beyond her sight, wanderers who might have carved their own paths, families free from doctrine, voices unbroken by their command. Freedom, she realized, was measured not in grand victories, but in each step that she chose for herself, even when the choice was only for her to keep on moving forward. Storms rolled across the land like living beasts, chasing her with thunder in the skies like an orchestra. She stood through them, drenched, trembling, but unwilling to bow. The horizon never ceased to call, a promise both cruel and kind, daring her to believe that there was more than survival waiting ahead. At last, the land itself seemed to answer. From the ridge she saw smoke rising, not from the ruins of doctrine, but from fires tended by unseen hands. The valley below bore signs of life, cultivated patches of earth, figures moving against the twilight. Her pulse quickened. This was no echo of the binding house, no shadow of her past. This was something else. The crossing had brought her here to the threshold of the unknown. For the first time, she understood that the journey was not only about leaving, but about arriving. And this is what that moment presented. Freedom was not the end of the path, but the beginning of another chapter. She pressed her palm against her chest, scar throbbing like a second heartbeat after another, and whispered into the wind, I will not return. I will not ever return. Then she stepped down from the ridge, the valley opening before her like a promise waiting to be claimed. As she exhaled, I have finally arrived.